The woman standing at the river's edge had mud on her boots and calculations in her eyes, measuring the distance between survival and catastrophe, while the current churned brown and angry below. Louisa Hartwell had arrived in Presidio, Texas, 3 weeks earlier with nothing but her engineering books, a letter of recommendation that no one in this dusty border town cared to read, and a determination that burned hotter than the summer sun beating down on the Rio Grande. The town needed a bridge. Everyone knew it. Every spring the waters rose and cut them off from the trade routes, from the ranches on the far side, from hope itself. But needing something and doing something about it were two different things entirely, and Louisa had learned quickly that being a woman with ideas in 1881 meant being a woman who talked to herself. She knelt in the dirt, spreading her drawings across a flat rock, weighing down the corners with stones smooth from the river's constant work. The design was sound. She had checked it 17 times, factoring in the river's width at its narrowest point, the seasonal flooding pattern she had researched in San Antonio before making this journey, the weight loads required for wagons and cattle. The bridge would be a timber truss design, strong enough to withstand the spring torrents, but simple enough to build with local materials. All she needed was someone to listen. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up. A lone rider approached from the direction of town, silhouetted against the white-hot sky. Louisa stood, shading her eyes with one hand, watching as the figure resolved into a man on a gray mare, moving with the easy confidence of someone who belonged to this landscape in a way she never would. He dismounted 20 feet away, tied his horse to a scraggly mesquite tree, and walked toward her without hurry. He was tall, built like he had spent his entire life working with his hands, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His clothes were simple, worn but clean, a working man's outfit that spoke of long days and little comfort. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, gray-green like the river in certain lights, taking in her drawings with an intensity that made her suddenly self-conscious. "You are the engineer," he said. It was not a question. His voice was low, rough with disuse, carrying just the trace of an accent she could not quite place. "Louisa Hartwell," she said, extending her hand. "And you are Carter Zimmerman." He took her hand briefly, his grip calloused and strong, then released it and crouched beside her drawings. He studied them in silence, his expression unreadable. Louisa found herself holding her breath, waiting for him to dismiss her work the way the town council had, the way the merchants and ranchers and every man she had approached had done with varying degrees of politeness. Instead, he touched one finger to the center span, tracing the support beam she had designed. "This would work," he said quietly. "You have accounted for the flood season. You understand engineering." The surprise in her voice was evident, and she saw something flicker in his expression, though whether it was amusement or offense she could not tell. "I understand building." He straightened, looking out across the river. "And I understand what happens when the water rises. Last spring we lost 2 children. They were trying to cross on horseback with their father. The current took them." The words landed like stones in still water. Louisa felt her throat tighten. "I heard about that. I am sorry. Sorry does not build bridges." He turned back to her, and now she could read his expression clearly. It was determination matching her own. "How much timber, excuse me, how much timber do you need? What lengths, what thickness?" He pointed at her drawings. "Show me." Something shifted in Louisa's chest, a weight she had been carrying since arriving in Presidio easing just slightly. She knelt beside her plans again, and this time when she explained her design, someone actually listened. Carter asked questions, good ones, about the timber sources, the foundation depth, the connection joints. He knew the land, knew where to find the straightest pines in the hills 20 miles north, knew which rancher might be willing to let them cut trees in exchange for priority use of the completed bridge. The town council refused to fund it, Louisa said when they had been talking for nearly an hour. The sun had moved considerably, and her canteen was empty. They said it was too expensive, too complicated. They said I did not know what I was talking about because I am a woman. Carter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The town council are fools. My ranch is on the far side. Every time the water rises, I lose days of work, sometimes weeks. Last year I could not get my cattle to market in time and the price dropped. The bridge is not expensive. Not building it is expensive. Try telling them that. I will not tell them anything. He gathered her drawings carefully, handling them as if they were precious, and handed them to her. But I will help you build it. Louisa stared at him. Just like that, just like that. He untied his horse, swung into the saddle with practiced ease. I will start bringing timber tomorrow. You work on the foundation plan. He paused, looking down at her from horseback. If you are going to do this, Miss Hartwell, do not ask permission, just do it. Then he was riding away, leaving Louisa standing alone by the river with her drawings clutched to her chest and hope starting to kindle in her heart like a flame catching dry grass. That night, in her small rented room above the general store, Louisa worked by lamplight on the foundation calculations. She had $60 to her name, money she had saved from her previous position as a surveyor's assistant in Houston. It was not enough to buy timber or hire workers, but it might be enough for the iron brackets and nails she would need, for the tools they did not already have. She had her own equipment, carefully packed in wooden crates that took up half her room. Levels and measuring chains, hammers and saws, even a small theodolite for precise angle measurements. The question was whether she could actually do this. Building a bridge was not like drafting plans in an office. It required labor, dangerous work over rushing water, technical precision that left no room for error. One mistake could mean deaths, could mean the whole structure collapsing into the Rio Grande. The responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders, but she had not come this far to turn back now. Morning arrived with its usual brutal heat. Louisa was at the riverbank before dawn, marking out the foundation points with wooden stakes. She waded into the shallows, feeling the current's strength, choosing her positions carefully. The bridge would span the narrowest point, roughly 120 feet of open water. She would need 4 main supports, 2 on each bank with the center span suspended between them. She was waist deep in the river, her skirts soaked and heavy when she heard the sound of wagon wheels. Turning, she saw Carter approaching with a full load of timber, the longest pieces stretching far behind the wagon bed. He had not been exaggerating about starting today. He worked without speaking, unloading the timber piece by piece, stacking it according to her specifications. Louisa waded out of the river, water streaming from her clothes, and immediately began examining the wood. It was good quality, straight-grained pine that would be strong and relatively light. He had cut pieces in varying lengths, exactly what she would need for the different sections of the bridge. "How did you get this so fast?" she asked. "I own the ranch," he said simply, "and the timber land. I started cutting 3 days ago. 3 days ago, but I only met you yesterday." He paused in his work, a beam balanced on one shoulder. "I heard about you the day you arrived, the woman engineer who wanted to build a bridge. I watched you at the town council meeting. I saw your plans were good." He continued toward the stack. "So I started cutting." Something warm unfurled in Louisa's chest, something she had not felt in a very long time. Trust. He had trusted her vision before he had even spoken to her, had started the work based solely on his assessment of her abilities. It was more respect than she had received from most men in her entire career. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once, already heading back for another load. They fell into a rhythm over the following days. Carter would arrive at dawn with timber, sometimes alone, sometimes with a teenage boy he introduced tersely as his ranch hand, Miguel. The boy was quick and strong, eager to help, and he treated Louisa's instructions with serious attention. Together, they began building the foundation cribs, sinking support structures into the riverbed that would anchor the bridge's main pillars. It was brutal work. The sun was merciless, the river treacherous. Louisa worked alongside the men, her skirts traded for a split-riding skirt that scandalized the town women, but allowed her to move freely. Her hands developed blisters that burst and calloused over. Her skin burned despite the wide-brimmed hat she wore constantly. But the bridge began to take shape. Other people started to notice. At first, they came to mock. The saloon keeper wandered down one afternoon with 3 of his regular customers, all of them half-drunk and full of opinions about women who did not know their place. But Carter simply kept working, his silence somehow more powerful than any argument, and eventually they drifted away. The mockery continued in town, Louisa knew. She heard the whispers when she bought supplies, saw the disapproving looks from respectable women who thought she was bringing shame on her entire sex. But then something shifted. A rancher named Thomas rode down to the construction site, watched for nearly an hour, and came back the next day with 2 of his workers. He did not say much, just nodded at Carter and Louisa and set his men to helping haul timber. A few days later, the blacksmith arrived with his son, bringing iron brackets he had forged himself, refusing payment. "For the bridge," he said gruffly. "My wife's sister lives across the river, has not seen her in 2 years because of the crossing." Word spread slowly but steadily. People who had lost loved ones to the river, who had lost time and money and opportunities, began to see the bridge as something real rather than a foolish woman's fantasy. They started contributing what they could: nails, rope, labor. Not everyone, and not the town council, but enough. Enough to matter. Through it all, Carter remained a constant, quiet presence. He spoke little, but his actions spoke volumes. He was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, working through the heat of the day with steady determination. He anticipated problems before Louisa spotted them, adjusting timber placement or reinforcing supports with an intuition born of years of practical experience. When a sudden storm threatened their progress, he was the one who covered the materials with canvas tarps he brought from his ranch. When Louisa's calculations hit a snag with the angle of the center truss, he sat beside her in the dirt and worked through the mathematics with her, his rough hands sketching diagrams that showed a mind far more educated than his simple cowboy appearance suggested. She found herself watching him when she thought he would not notice. The way he moved, economical and purposeful. The rare moments when he almost smiled, usually at something Miguel said. The absolute focus he brought to every task, no matter how small. And sometimes, she caught him watching her too, his gray-green eyes thoughtful in a way that made her heart beat faster. 3 weeks into construction, disaster nearly struck. They were working on the first main support pillar, a massive structure that would bear half the bridge's weight. The timber was in place, the joints secured, and they were beginning to raise it into position using a pulley system Louisa had designed. Carter was in the river, guiding the base, while Louisa and 3 other men worked the ropes from the bank. The pulley snapped without warning. The rope went slack, and the entire structure started to topple backward into the river, directly toward Carter. Louisa screamed his name, her voice raw with terror. He looked up, saw the falling timber, and tried to dive aside, but the current was strong and the riverbed slippery. The massive beam came down like the fist of God. Miguel was faster. The boy hit the water running, grabbed Carter's arm, and yanked him sideways with desperate strength. They both went under as the timber crashed down where Carter had been standing seconds before. For a terrible moment, Louisa saw nothing but churning water and debris. Then two heads broke the surface downstream, both men coughing and gasping but alive. She was in the water before she realized she had moved, fighting the current to reach them. Her hands found Carter's shirt, Miguel's arm, and she was pulling them toward the bank with strength born of pure fear. Other hands joined hers, dragging both men onto solid ground. Carter lay on his back in the mud, chest heaving, water streaming from his hair and clothes. Louisa knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she checked him for injuries. "Are you hurt? Tell me where you are hurt." He caught her wrist gently, his fingers warm despite the river water. "I am fine. Louisa, I am fine." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it sounded like something precious in his rough voice. "You nearly died," she said, and she could hear the tremor in her words. "The pulley should not have broken. I checked it. I checked everything. It was not your fault." He sat up slowly, wincing but moving without the stiffness of serious injury. He turned to Miguel. "You saved my life, boy." Miguel grinned, still catching his breath. "You would have done the same for me, boss." Carter gripped the boy's shoulder briefly, a gesture that said more than words could. Then he stood, water pouring from his clothes, and looked at the fallen timber. "We need stronger rope for the pulleys, and we need to work slower. Getting the bridge built is not worth dying for." But as he said it, his eyes met Louisa's, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. They both knew it was not entirely true. Some things were worth risking everything for. That evening, as the other workers headed back to town, Carter lingered. He helped Louisa secure the construction site, checking that everything was properly stored and protected. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reflected on the river's surface, transforming the muddy water into something almost beautiful. "You are afraid," Carter said suddenly. They were standing at the edge of the unfinished bridge, looking out across the water. "Of what?" Louisa kept her voice steady, though her heart had started racing. "That if something goes wrong, if someone gets hurt, they will blame you. They will say a woman should not have tried to build a bridge." He turned to face her. "But you should know that no one here thinks that. Not anymore. They see how hard you work. They see that you know what you are doing." "And what do you see?" The question escaped before she could stop it, more vulnerable than she had intended. He was quiet for a long moment, and in the fading light his eyes were very dark. "I see someone who came to a place that did not want her and decided to do something that mattered anyway. I see someone brave." He paused. "I see someone I want to keep seeing." Louisa's breath caught in her throat. The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned, and she realized with sudden clarity that somewhere in these weeks of sweat and sawdust and shared purpose, she had fallen in love with this quiet man who spoke with his actions more than his words. "I am not brave," she said softly. "I am terrified most of the time. Terrified of failing, of proving everyone who doubted me right. Terrified that someone will get hurt because I made a mistake. Being brave does not mean not being afraid." Carter stepped closer, close enough that she could see the water droplets still caught in his hair, could smell the clean scent of sawdust that clung to him. "It means doing what needs to be done anyway." "Is that why you help me?" "Because it needs to be done. At first, maybe. But now." He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and touched her cheek with his calloused fingers. "Now I help because when I am working beside you, I feel like I am part of something larger than myself. And because every morning when I ride here, I find myself hoping you will smile when you see me." "I always smile when I see you," Louisa whispered. "I know." And then he did smile, a real one that transformed his entire face, making him younger and somehow more himself. "That is the problem." She laughed, a startled sound that surprised them both, and suddenly the fear that had been gripping her heart eased. He was right. She was afraid, but she was also here, doing the work that mattered, with a man beside her who saw her for exactly who she was and chose to stay anyway. "Carter," she said, testing his name on her tongue. "Tomorrow we will get stronger rope, and we will build the bridge right. We will be careful, and we will succeed." "Yes," he agreed. "We will." They stood together as the stars began to appear, and Louisa felt something settle in her chest, something that felt remarkably like coming home. The next weeks passed in a blur of steady progress. True to Carter's word, they worked more carefully, taking the time to double-check every measurement, every joint, every support. The foundation pillars rose from the river, solid and strong. The first crossbeams went up without incident, forming the skeleton of what would become the bridge's deck. Louisa worked with an intensity that sometimes made her forget to eat, forget to sleep, until Carter would appear with food from the hotel or his ranch and insist she take a break. They talked during those breaks, sharing pieces of their pasts. Louisa learned that Carter had come to Texas 8 years earlier from Colorado, where his family had a small farm that failed during a drought. He had worked as a ranch hand for 5 years, saving every penny until he had enough to buy his own land. The ranch was modest but growing, mainly cattle with some horses. He lived alone in a small house he had built himself, preferring the solitude to the noise of town. "Why a ranch on the far side of the river?" Louisa asked one evening. They were sitting on a stack of timber, sharing water from her canteen. "It would have been easier to buy land closer to Presidio." "Easier," Carter agreed, "but the land there was more expensive, already taken. This side, no one wanted it because of the crossing. I got it cheap." He looked at the bridge taking shape before them. "I always knew someday there would be a bridge. I just did not know I would help build it." "Do you regret it? The hard years without easy access to town?" He considered this seriously. "No, the isolation taught me things, made me self-sufficient. And it meant that when I met someone worth crossing a river for, I knew what that meant." Louisa felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "Carter Zimmerman, are you flirting with me?" "I am trying to. I am not very good at it." But his eyes were warm with something that might have been amusement, might have been affection, might have been both. She bumped his shoulder with hers, a gesture of companionship that felt natural and right. "I think you are better at it than you realize." For his part, Carter learned that Louisa had grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a mathematics professor, who had taught her advanced calculations before she was 10. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father had raised her without regard for the conventional limitations placed on girls. He had encouraged her curiosity, her aptitude for numbers and spatial reasoning. When he died 3 years ago, he left her a small inheritance and a letter encouraging her to pursue engineering, no matter how difficult the path. "I tried to work in St. Louis," Louisa told him, "but no firm would hire a woman engineer. They would take my father's name, his reputation, but not me. So I went to Houston, worked as a surveyor's assistant. That was better, but still limited. When I heard that Texas towns were growing, needing infrastructure, I thought perhaps out here, on the frontier, people might be more practical, might care more about competence than convention." "And did they?" She laughed. but it was not entirely humorous. Not at first, but you did. From the beginning, you treated my knowledge as valuable. You have no idea what that means to someone who has been dismissed her entire professional life. You are the smartest person I have ever met, Carter said simply. Anyone who dismisses you is a fool. These conversations wove between them like threads, connecting them beyond the physical work of bridge building. Louisa found herself thinking about Carter at odd moments, remembering the way his hands moved with such certainty, the way he listened with his whole attention when she spoke, the way he positioned himself between her and any potential danger without making a show of it. She caught herself wondering what it would be like to kiss him, to feel those roughened hands gentle against her skin, to build something together that was not timber and iron but a life, a future. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She had never imagined getting married, never thought any man would accept her ambitions and odd profession. But Carter was different. He did not just accept what she did, he admired it. He saw her mind as something valuable rather than aberrant. When she solved a difficult engineering problem, she saw genuine pride in his expression. When she accomplished something physically demanding, he did not rush to coddle her but acknowledged her capability. Still, she hesitated to say anything. What if she was misreading his kindness? What if his compliments were merely friendly? What if speaking her feelings would ruin the easy partnership they had built? So she kept her growing love quiet, hidden beneath discussions of load-bearing capacity and timber treatments. Meanwhile, the bridge continued to grow. The main supports were completed, rising 15 feet above the river's normal level to account for spring flooding. The deck supports went up next, a complex network of triangular trusses that distributed weight efficiently. Local volunteers continued to show up, some regularly, others sporadically as their own work allowed. An older woman named Mrs. Chen, who ran a boarding house, started bringing lunch for all the workers, refusing payment and simply saying that her grandson had nearly drowned trying to cross the river 2 years ago. Not everyone was supportive. The town council, embarrassed that the bridge was being built without their sanction or funding, began making noises about permits and regulations. The mayor, a pompous man named Whitfield, came to the construction site one afternoon with the sheriff, declaring that all work must stop until proper paperwork was filed. Carter listened to this declaration in silence, his expression unreadable. Then he said very quietly, "The bridge is being built on my land, both sides. I own the property rights on this bank and the far bank. I have checked the county records. So unless you have a legal basis to stop a man from building on his own property, I suggest you leave." The mayor blustered and argued, but Carter's calm certainty undermined him. The sheriff, who had lost his own brother to the river years before, simply shrugged and said he did not see any laws being broken. Eventually they left, though everyone knew this would not be the end of the resistance. "You own both banks?" Louisa asked after they had gone. "I did not know that. I bought the near bank property last year, thought it might be useful someday." He was examining a joint connection, making minute adjustments, and now it is. "You planned this." It was not a question. "I planned for the possibility of someday building a bridge, yes. I did not plan on you." He glanced at her, and there was something in his expression that made her heart skip. "You were a surprise." Before Louisa could respond, Miguel called for help with a heavy beam and the moment passed. But it lingered in her mind, warm and promising. 2 months into construction, they reached a critical juncture. The deck itself needed to be laid, and this was the most dangerous part of the entire project. Workers would be suspended over the river on structures not yet fully secured, laying planks and securing them in precise configurations. One mistake, one loose board, and someone could fall into the current below. Louisa spent an entire night rechecking her calculations, making sure the weight distribution was correct, that the temporary safety ropes would hold, that every detail was perfect. She barely slept, running through scenarios in her mind. When dawn came, she was at the bridge site before anyone else, her eyes gritty with exhaustion, her stomach tight with anxiety. Carter arrived to find her standing motionless in the center of the partially completed deck, staring down at the water rushing below. He crossed to her carefully, his boots loud on the timber. "Louisa." She turned to him and he saw the fear in her eyes. "What if I have made a mistake? What if the calculations are wrong?" "Your calculations are not wrong." He took her hands, his grip warm and solid. "I have checked them myself. They are perfect. But even if they were not, we would catch the error together. You are not alone in this. People could die." "Yes," he said honestly. "In any dangerous work, that is true, but more people will die if we do not build this bridge. Children will die trying to cross on horseback. Men will die driving wagons through floodwaters. Women will die cut off from medical help when they need it most." He squeezed her hands gently. "You are giving people a chance to live, Louisa. Do not let fear steal that from you." She looked up at him, at the absolute certainty in his face, and felt something unlock in her chest. "How are you always so sure?" "I am not always sure about most things," he admitted, "but I am sure about you." The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her. She stepped closer, resting her forehead against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart through his shirt. His arms came around her, not demanding anything, just offering comfort and strength. They stood like that for a long moment, the river rushing below them, the morning sun warming their backs. Then Louisa pulled herself together, straightening and wiping at her eyes. "All right, let us build a bridge," Carter smiled. "That is my girl, my girl." The words echoed in her mind all day as they worked, as sweet and strong as honey. The decking went smoothly. Carter's insistence on extra safety measures paid off when one worker did slip, but the rope harnesses caught him before he fell more than a few feet. By evening, a third of the deck was complete, and Louisa finally allowed herself to believe they would actually finish this. More help arrived as the bridge neared completion. It seemed half the town had decided to be part of this achievement, even if they had not supported it initially. Men, women, and older children came to help in whatever way they could, carrying supplies, preparing meals for workers, even just offering encouragement. The bridge became a symbol of what a community could accomplish when it worked together. Louisa saw Carter everywhere, orchestrating the work with quiet efficiency. He had become the unofficial foreman, the person everyone looked to for guidance, yet he always deferred to Louisa on technical decisions. He made it clear to everyone that this was her vision, her design, and they were simply helping bring it to life. One evening, as the work was winding down for the day, an old rancher named Patterson approached Louisa. He was a man who had spoken against her at the town council meeting, calling her plan foolish and her presumption offensive. Now he stood before her, hat in his weathered hands, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Hartwell," he said gruffly, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you. This bridge, it is going to save lives. Already has, in a way. My granddaughter, she has been courting a boy from across the river. They want to marry, but she was afraid to move so far away where we could not visit easy. Now, with this bridge, we will be able to see her whenever we want. That means the world to an old man like me." Louisa felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you for telling me that, Mr. Patterson." He nodded brusquely, then surprised her by adding, "That cowboy of yours, Zimmerman, he is a good man. You hold on to him." "He is not my," she started, But Patterson was already walking away, and she realized that to everyone watching them work together day after day, the connection between her and Carter must be obvious. The thought made her blush and smile at the same time. She looked around for Carter and found him talking with Miguel near the tool wagon. As if sensing her gaze, he glanced up, and their eyes met across the construction site. Something passed between them, unspoken but understood, and Louisa knew with sudden certainty that whatever happened next, she wanted Carter Zimmerman in her life. The bridge was completed on a warm afternoon in late September. The final plank was laid, the last nail driven, and suddenly this thing they had been building for months was finished. It stretched across the Rio Grande like a promise kept, solid and strong and real. A crowd had gathered to watch the completion. Someone suggested they have an opening ceremony, but Louisa shook her head. "It is a bridge, not a monument. Let us see if it works." Carter brought his wagon forward, the same one he had used to haul timber all those weeks ago. He climbed onto the seat and looked at Louisa. "Come with me." She did not hesitate, climbing up beside him. He snapped the reins and the horses moved forward onto the bridge. The wagon's wheels rumbled on the deck planks. The structure held firm, not even swaying under the weight. They crossed the entire length, reached the far bank, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Carter stopped the wagon and turned to Louisa. The noise of celebration faded into background as she looked at him, at the man who had believed in her when no one else did, who had worked beside her without asking for anything in return, who had somehow become essential to her happiness. "You did it," he said softly. "You built a bridge across the river the whole town needed." "We did it," she corrected. "I could not have done this without you." "You could have," he said, "but I am glad you did not have to." Then, while half the town watched from the far bank, Carter Zimmerman cupped Louisa Hartwell's face in his rough, gentle hands and kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted like dust and sweat and triumph, like weeks of unspoken longing finally given voice, like the beginning of something neither of them had been looking for but both desperately needed. When they pulled apart, Louisa was smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. "Well, that was unexpected." "Was it?" Carter asked, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Not really, no," she laughed, giddy with happiness and relief and the simple joy of being exactly where she wanted to be. "Carter, I need to tell you something." "Tell me. I love you." "I think I have loved you since that first day when you came to the river and told me you would help build the bridge, when you trusted my design without question, when you saw me as an engineer first and a woman second." "I saw you as both," he said, "and I loved both. The brilliant mind and the determined heart. The woman who would stand in a river measuring angles, and the woman who worries about everyone's safety before her own." He kissed her again, softer this time. "I love you, Louisa Hartwell. I would very much like to marry you, if you will have a simple cowboy who does not have much to offer except a ranch, a good horse, and a promise to support your work for the rest of our lives." "That is everything I want," Louisa whispered. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." The cheering from the far bank suggested their conversation had not been as private as they thought. Carter grinned and drove the wagon back across the bridge, and this time Louisa waved at the crowd, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church at the edge of Presidio. Louisa wore a simple blue dress that matched Carter's eyes in certain lights, and Carter wore his Sunday best, his hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. Miguel stood as Carter's witness, beaming with pride. Mrs. Chen stood as Louisa's, having adopted the younger woman like a daughter over the course of the bridge construction. The ceremony was short and sweet. The preacher's words about partnership and building a life together seeming especially appropriate given how they had met. When Carter kissed his bride, the small gathering applauded, and Louisa felt a joy so complete, it seemed impossible that life could contain this much happiness. The reception was held at Carter's ranch, which Louisa was seeing for the first time as his wife. The house was small but well built, with good bones and beautiful views of the surrounding hills. Carter carried her over the threshold to laughter and catcalls from the guests, and Louisa looked around what would now be her home with a sense of rightness settling over her. "What do you think?" Carter asked once the guests had finally left and they were alone. "I think it needs a larger workspace," Louisa said thoughtfully. "Somewhere I can spread out my drawings and plans, and I think we should add a second bedroom eventually." Eventually. He pulled her close, his hands warm on her waist. "Well, perhaps not too eventually." She wound her arms around his neck. "But for now, I believe we only need one bedroom." Carter's laugh was low and warm against her ear. "I like how you think, Mrs. Zimmerman." Mrs. Zimmerman. The name felt strange and wonderful at once. She had never imagined taking a husband's name, but hearing it from Carter's lips, she found she did not mind. It was not about losing her identity, but about adding to it, becoming part of something larger than herself. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Carter made love to his wife with the same careful attention he brought to everything he did. He learned what made her gasp, what made her arch into his touch, treating her pleasure as seriously as he had treated her bridge plans. Louisa had never felt so cherished, so completely known. They fell asleep tangled together, the windows open to let in the cool night air, and she thought that this was what happiness felt like. The months that followed were full of adjustments and discoveries. Louisa learned ranch life, helping Carter with the cattle and horses when she was not working on engineering projects. Her reputation had grown after the bridge. Now ranchers and town councils from surrounding areas sought her expertise. She designed a water system for a neighboring community, planned an expansion for Presidio's Main Street, consulted on a mining operation's structural supports. Carter supported every project, often helping with the physical labor when her designs required construction. They worked well together, Louisa's technical knowledge complementing Carter's practical experience. At home, they divided tasks based on ability rather than gender, Carter cooking most meals while Louisa handled the ranch finances and planning. They argued occasionally, both strong-willed and accustomed to independence, but they learned to navigate disagreements with honesty and respect. Miguel became a regular presence at their home, the boy clearly viewing Carter as a father figure and Louisa as the educated older sister he had never had. She began teaching him mathematics and engineering principles in the evenings, discovering that he had a quick mind for spatial reasoning. Carter encouraged this, pleased to see the boy developing skills that could serve him well in life. The bridge stood solid through the winter and into spring. When the Rio Grande flooded in April, the water rose high but did not overtop the deck, exactly as Louisa's calculations had predicted. The bridge swayed slightly under the current's force but held firm, and the whole town breathed easier knowing they were no longer cut off during high water. Children crossed safely to visit relatives. Trade goods moved freely. A doctor from the far side could reach patients in Presidio within an hour, instead of waiting days for the water to recede. Lives were saved, just as Carter had said they would be. A pregnant woman experiencing complications was able to get to the doctor in time. A child with a snake bite received anti-venom before the poison could do permanent damage. Every time Louisa heard such stories, she felt the rightness of what she had done, the validation of every difficult moment during construction. Carter watched his wife bloom in the respect she was finally receiving, and his love for her deepened daily. He loved her brilliant mind, yes, but also her terrible singing when she thought no one was listening, her habit of chewing her pencil when concentrating, the way she would absently run calculations on any available surface, including the condensation on window panes. He loved how fiercely she defended her ideas and how graciously she admitted when she was wrong. He loved waking up beside her, loved the conversations that stretched late into the night, loved the life they were building together. One evening in early summer, nearly a year after they had married, Louisa found Carter standing at the edge of their property, looking toward the river and the bridge visible in the distance. She came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How different my life is now than I thought it would be," he said. "A year ago I was alone and I thought that was fine. I had my ranch, my work, it was enough, or I told myself it was." He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the setting sun. "Then you came and suddenly everything was more complicated, yes, but more everything. More laughter, more purpose, more happiness than I knew existed." Louisa leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I feel the same way. I thought my work was enough. I thought if I could just prove myself as an engineer, that would fulfill me. But being with you, building a life together, it has shown me that achievement means more when you have someone to share it with." "I have something to tell you," Carter said, a note of excitement in his voice that was unusual for him. "What is it?" "I bought more land. Along the river, about 5 miles upstream. It is a good location, and I was thinking," he paused, almost shy. "I was thinking that maybe someday you could design another bridge there. The crossing is dangerous and it would benefit the ranches in that area. But only if you want to." "I do not want to pressure you." Louisa pulled back to look at him fully. "You bought land so I could build another bridge." "I bought land because it was a good investment," he corrected gently. "But yes, I also thought about what you could do with it, if you want to." She kissed him hard, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. "I want to. Though this time, maybe we could get actual funding and hire workers instead of building it ourselves." Carter laughed. "That sounds reasonable, though I admit I enjoyed the time we spent building the first bridge. Even the difficult parts." "Especially the difficult parts," Louisa agreed. "That is when I fell in love with you, I think. When things were hard and you just kept showing up, kept working, kept believing we could do it." They stood together as the sky darkened, talking about plans for the future. Another bridge, yes, but also possibly a whole career for Louisa designing infrastructure for the growing Texas towns. They talked about expanding the ranch, maybe breeding horses as well as cattle. And they talked, tentatively at first and then with growing enthusiasm, about starting a family. "I want children with you," Louisa said. "I never thought I would say that. I was always so focused on my career and I was afraid that marriage and children would end that. But with you, I know you would never ask me to give up who I am." "Never," Carter agreed firmly. "Any children we have will be lucky to have a mother who shows them that intelligence and determination and following your dreams are important, just as they will learn from their father that hard work and integrity matter." He grinned. "Though I hope they get your brains and not just my stubbornness." "Your stubbornness is part of your charm," Louisa assured him. They tried for a baby that night and many nights after, lovemaking transforming from something purely about pleasure to something purposeful yet still deeply intimate. It took several months, but eventually Louisa's monthly courses stopped and other signs appeared. Morning nausea, tender breasts, a strange metallic taste in her mouth. The doctor in Presidio confirmed what they suspected. Louisa was pregnant. Carter's joy was profound and quiet, expressing itself in increased protectiveness and tender gestures. He insisted Louisa reduce her physical work, though she rolled her eyes at his hovering. She continued taking engineering consultations throughout her pregnancy, adapting her work to her changing body. She designed a courthouse for a town 40 miles away, planned an irrigation system for a collective of farmers, and sketched preliminary plans for that second bridge Carter had mentioned. Miguel was thrilled at the prospect of a baby in the house, already declaring himself the future child's favorite uncle. Mrs. Chen appeared with herbal teas and advice, drawing on traditional Chinese wisdom about pregnancy and childbirth. The women of Presidio who had once scorned Louisa now included her in their circles, sharing their own experiences and offering support. The pregnancy progressed normally until the 7th month, when Louisa began experiencing cramping and spotting. The doctor ordered bed rest, and for a woman as active as Louisa, this was torture. She chafed at the confinement, worried about her projects, fretted about being useless. Carter stayed close, working near the house so he could check on her frequently. He brought her books and engineering journals, set up a desk beside the bed so she could at least work on plans and calculations. At night, he held her while she cried from frustration and fear, whispering reassurances that both she and the baby would be fine. "I am supposed to be strong," she said one night, tears streaming down her face. "I built a bridge. I should be able to handle lying in bed for a few weeks. Physical strength and emotional strength are different things," Carter said gently. "And you are handling this. You are doing what needs to be done to keep our baby safe. That takes tremendous strength." His faith in her helped Louisa through the difficult weeks. She rested, chafed though she did, and gradually the spotting stopped. The cramping eased. By the 8th month, the doctor cautiously declared that she could move about the house normally, though no strenuous activity. Their son was born on a cool October morning, arriving 3 weeks early but healthy and strong. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Carter, waiting anxiously in the next room, thought he might lose his mind from the worry. But Louisa was as determined in childbirth as she was in everything else, and finally, the baby's cry pierced the air. The midwife brought him out wrapped in a soft blanket. "A boy," she announced, "and his mama is tired but well." Carter took his son with shaking hands, awed by the tiny, perfect human they had created. The baby had Louisa's dark hair and his own gray-green eyes, and Carter felt love slam into him with physical force. "Hello," he whispered. "I am your father, and I promise to do my best by you." Then he was allowed into the bedroom, where Louisa lay exhausted and radiant, her hair damp with sweat but her smile brilliant. "Let me see him," she demanded. Carter placed their son in her arms, and Louisa looked down at the baby with wonder. "We made a person," she said, almost laughing. "Carter, we made an entire person." "You did most of the work," he pointed out, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "You helped a little," she teased. Then, more seriously, "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything. Now, looking at their son, Carter said, "What about James? After your father," Louisa's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that. Your father taught you to be who you are. Without him, you never would have become an engineer, never would have come to Presidio, never would have built the bridge. Never would have met me." He touched the baby's tiny hand, smiling as miniature fingers wrapped around his rough one. "He gave me everything by raising you the way he did. The least we can do is honor his memory." "James Zimmerman," Louisa said softly. "Jimmy when he is small, yes, that is perfect." The next months were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Jimmy was a relatively easy baby, but he was still a baby demanding attention at all hours. Louisa nursed him while reviewing engineering plans, rocking him to sleep while discussing ranch business with Carter. She was determined not to let motherhood derail her career, and Carter supported this completely, taking on much of the household work and child care when Louisa had meetings or site visits. They hired a young woman named Sarah to help with the housework and watching Jimmy when both Carter and Louisa were occupied. Sarah was practical and good-natured, treating her employers with friendly respect. She was fascinated by Louisa's work and often asked questions about engineering, which Louisa was happy to answer. When Jimmy was 4 months old, Louisa returned to the second bridge project. This time, with actual funding from the ranchers who would benefit, she was able to hire skilled workers and purchase quality materials from the start. Carter helped when he could, but he was not as central to this project, and Louisa found she missed working so closely with him. Still, she loved the work itself, loved seeing her designs become reality, loved knowing she was contributing something lasting and important. The second bridge was completed when Jimmy was 10 months old, and this time there was an official ceremony. The mayor of Presidio attended, conveniently forgetting his initial opposition to the first bridge. Speeches were made about progress and community, and Louisa was formally recognized as the engineer responsible for both bridges. She stood before the crowd with Jimmy on her hip, and when Carter joined her on the platform, the applause was thunderous. "People of Presidio and surrounding communities," Louisa said when the noise died down. "These bridges exist not because of me alone, but because of everyone who believed they were possible. Because of workers who volunteered their time. Because of people who contributed materials. Because of one man especially, who carried timber without a word when no one else would help, who believed in my vision before he even knew me." She looked at Carter, love shining in her eyes. "My husband taught me that the best projects are the ones we build together. Thank you all for being part of this." More applause, and then the ceremony concluded with the traditional first crossing. This time, several wagons crossed simultaneously, demonstrating the bridge's capacity. Louisa watched with satisfaction, checking the structure for any signs of stress or weakness. Everything held perfectly. That night, after Jimmy was asleep and the house was quiet, Carter and Louisa sat on their porch watching the stars. 2 bridges, Carter mused. What is next for the brilliant engineer Louisa Zimmerman? "I have been thinking about that," Louisa said. "There are so many communities in Texas that need infrastructure, better roads, water systems, bridges. I could spend my entire life working on projects like this." She paused. "But I also want more children. I want to watch Jimmy grow up. I want time with you that is not about work." "So do both," Carter said simply. "Take some projects, turn down others. Work when it suits you, rest when you need to. You do not have to choose between being an engineer and being a wife and mother. You can be all of it." "Can I?" Louisa asked. "Most women cannot." "You are not most women." He pulled her close. "You never have been. That is one of the 1,000 reasons I love you." They sat together in comfortable silence, the future spreading before them full of possibility. Louisa thought about the girl she had been when she arrived in Presidio, alone and uncertain, armed with nothing but her knowledge and her determination. That girl had built a bridge and found a home and discovered love in the process. She had become someone's wife, someone's mother, and somehow she had done all that without losing herself. "Carter," she said softly, thank you for seeing me, for seeing all of me from the very beginning, for never asking me to be smaller or quieter or less than I am." He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for letting me be part of your life, for building something extraordinary and allowing me to stand beside you while you did." The years passed gently after that. Louisa took on several more engineering projects, each one adding to her reputation until she was known throughout Texas as the woman who bridged the Rio Grande. She was consulted on major infrastructure projects, her opinions sought and respected. Yet she always made time for her family, for Carter and Jimmy, and eventually 2 more children, a daughter named Clara and another son named Samuel. The children grew up understanding that their mother did important work, just as their father did. They helped at the ranch during busy seasons and sat quietly at construction sites when Louisa needed to inspect her projects. Jimmy showed an early aptitude for engineering, while Clara seemed more interested in ranching, and Samuel displayed a gift for drawing and design. Carter and Louisa encouraged all their children's interests equally, teaching them that work was valuable regardless of whether it fit traditional gender expectations. Miguel, who everyone simply called Mig now, married Sarah when he was 22 and she was 20. They built a house on Carter's land and helped run the ranch, which had expanded considerably over the years. Mig never lost his interest in engineering, and he often assisted Louisa with her projects, becoming a skilled builder in his own right. Their children played with Carter and Louisa's children, and the 2 families were as close as blood. Mrs. Chen remained a fixture in their lives until she passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73. Louisa mourned her deeply. This woman who had been more mother to her than her own had lived to be. At the funeral, dozens of people came to pay respects, including many who remembered that Mrs. Chen had been one of the first to support the bridge project when nearly everyone else had mocked it. The first bridge, the one that had brought Carter and Louisa together, stood for 30 years before it needed significant repairs. By then, Jimmy was 29, newly graduated from an engineering program in Houston, and he took on the renovation as his first major independent project. He used his mother's original design as the foundation, but incorporated newer techniques and materials where appropriate. Louisa consulted, proud beyond words to see her son carrying forward the work she had started. Carter, now in his 50s, still helped with the physical labor despite Louisa's protests. "I carried timber for the original bridge," he said stubbornly. "I will carry timber for this one too." "You are going to hurt your back," she warned. "Probably," he agreed cheerfully. "But some things are worth an aching back." The renovated bridge was completed in the spring, and this time it was Jimmy who stood before the crowd and gave the dedication speech. But he began by calling his mother up beside him. "This bridge exists because of my mother's vision and courage," he told the gathered crowd. "She came to a place that did not want her expertise and built something that changed lives. She showed me that engineering is not just about calculations and materials. It is about seeing what a community needs and having the determination to create it. Everything I know about integrity and perseverance, I learned from watching her work." Louisa stood beside her son, tears streaming down her face, and felt Carter's hand slip into hers. She squeezed tight, thinking about everything that had happened since that first day she stood by the river with her drawings. The bridge, yes, but also the life she had built, the family she had created, the love that had sustained her through every difficulty. That evening, the family gathered at the ranch for a celebratory dinner. All 3 children were there with their spouses and babies, the house full of noise and laughter. Louisa looked around the table at the people she loved, at the life that had grown from a single act of determination, and felt complete. Later, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Carter found Louisa standing by the window, looking out toward where the bridge was visible in the moonlight. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking that I am grateful," she said, "for all of it, the struggles, the triumphs, the ordinary days that make up a life. I am grateful that I was brave enough to come to Presidio, grateful that you were brave enough to help me, grateful for every moment that led us here. Even the town council meetings where they called you foolish, Carter teased. "Even those," she confirmed, laughing. "Because they showed me who truly believed in me. They showed me you." Carter turned her in his arms so they were face to face. His hair was gray now. Lines creased his tanned skin, but his eyes were still the same, still looking at her with that mixture of admiration and love that had never wavered in all their years together. "I love you, Louisa Zimmerman," he said. "I have loved you from the moment you stood in that river with mud on your boots and determination in your eyes. I will love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that if the universe allows it." "I love you too," she whispered. "My quiet cowboy who carried timber without a word and changed my life completely." They kissed there by the window, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Outside, the bridge stretched across the river, solid and enduring, a testament to what was possible when vision met determination met love. The years continued to pass gently. Carter and Louisa grew old together, their bodies slowing but their minds still sharp. They sat on their porch in the evenings, watching grandchildren play in the yard, discussing the day's events and the larger questions of life. Carter's ranch prospered under Mig's management, and Louisa's engineering legacy lived on through Jimmy and the many people she had mentored over the years. When Carter was 68, he was thrown from a spooked horse and broke his hip. The injury healed but left him with a pronounced limp and chronic pain. He bore it stoically, refusing to let it slow him down more than necessary, but Louisa saw how he struggled. She made sure he took the pain medicines the doctor prescribed, insisted on easier work assignments, and simply held him when the pain was bad enough to keep him awake at night. "I am sorry," he said once, during a particularly difficult evening. "I am not the man I was. I cannot do everything I used to." "Carter Zimmerman," Louisa said firmly, "you have worked hard your entire life. You have earned the right to slow down. And you are still the man I fell in love with. A little gray hair and a limp do not change that." He smiled at her, grateful and loving. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," she corrected. "We found each other." Louisa remained healthy and active into her 70s, though she finally retired from active engineering work at 72. By then, she had designed or consulted on over 50 major projects throughout Texas and neighboring territories. Her reputation was such that young women interested in engineering sought her out for advice and mentorship. She gave freely of her knowledge, encouraging every girl who showed interest in mathematics or building or design. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. The whole community came, people whose lives had been touched by the bridges, by Carter's quiet generosity, by Louisa's groundbreaking work. Speeches were made, toasts offered, and a formal photograph taken of Carter and Louisa surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Looking at that photograph later, Louisa marveled at how full her life had become. The young woman who had arrived in Presidio alone and uncertain had built not just bridges but a legacy, a family, a life rich with purpose and love. And the man standing beside her in the photograph, still handsome despite his years, was the foundation of it all. Carter passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 74, Louisa lying beside him. She woke to find him gone, his face relaxed and calm, and though her heart broke, she also felt grateful that he had suffered no prolonged illness, no terrible decline. He had simply worked until he could not work anymore, loved until his last breath, and then slipped away into whatever came next. The funeral was massive, attended by hundreds of people from across Texas. The procession crossed the first bridge, the one Carter and Louisa had built together, and Louisa felt a rightness in that. He was carried over the bridge that had begun their love story, honored by the community he had served so well. Louisa lived another 8 years after Carter died. Years she spent surrounded by family and continuing her work mentoring young engineers. She never remarried, never even considered it. Carter had been her partner in every sense, and that part of her life felt complete. But she did not wither in his absence. She continued to engage with life, to find joy in her grandchildren's accomplishments, to watch the bridges she had built continue to serve their communities decade after decade. When she was 82, Louisa returned to the first bridge one final time. Jimmy drove her there, his own hair gray now, his own children grown. They stood together on the deck, looking down at the river flowing beneath them. "This is where it all started," Louisa said softly. "Your father came to me here the day after we met. He said he would help me build it." Just like that, no hesitation. That was when I started to love him, though I did not know it yet. "He loved you the same way," Jimmy said. "Completely from the start. He told me once that seeing you standing by this river with your drawings was like seeing the future he had not known he wanted." Louisa smiled, remembering. "We built something good together, not just this bridge but a life, a family, something that mattered." "You both did," Jimmy agreed, "and it continues. Clara's daughter wants to study engineering. She says she wants to be like her grandmother. And my youngest, Sam's boy, he is already showing talent for design. What you started, what you and Dad built together, it keeps going." "That is what legacy means," Louisa said. "Not just what you do, but how it continues after you are gone." They stood there a while longer, mother and son, looking at the bridge that had changed everything. Then Jimmy drove Louisa home, and she spent the evening writing in the journal she had kept for decades, recording her thoughts and memories for the generations to come. Louisa Zimmerman died peacefully at the age of 83, surrounded by family, her hand held by her eldest son. Her last words were, "Tell your father I am coming." And though Jamie was not sure if she meant her own father or Carter, he simply squeezed her hand and said, "I will." She was buried beside Carter in the cemetery overlooking the town they had served so well. The headstone was simple, stating only her name, her dates, and a single line. She built bridges, and she had. Bridges of timber and iron that spanned rivers and connected communities. Bridges between people, bringing together those who had doubted and those who had believed. Bridges between past and future, showing young women that they could be engineers, could be builders, could be anything they dreamed. And most importantly, the bridge of love that had connected her to Carter Zimmerman, the quiet cowboy who had carried timber without a word and given her a lifetime of partnership and devotion. The bridges remained, solid and enduring, testimony to what one determined woman and one steadfast man had accomplished together. Travelers crossing them in years to come would likely never know the story behind their construction, never know about the woman who had come to Presidio with nothing but her knowledge and courage, or the man who had believed in her when no one else would. But the bridges stood, and they would continue to stand for generations, carrying people safely across waters that had once been insurmountable barriers. And in that enduring function, in that ongoing service to community, Louisa and Carter's love story continued, built into the very structure of the bridges themselves, permanent and strong and true. Years turned to decades. The small town of Presidio grew into a proper city. The bridges underwent renovations and updates, but always following Louisa's original designs, which proved sound beyond even her expectations. Engineers came from across the country to study her work, and her journals were eventually donated to a university archive, where students could learn not just her technical knowledge, but also her philosophy of engineering as service. Carter's ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations, expanded and modernized but still recognizably the place where he and Louisa had raised their children. The house was added onto over the years, but the original bedroom where they had slept for 4 decades was preserved, kept as Carter and Louisa had left it, a small memorial to the love that had been the foundation of everything that came after. And on quiet evenings, when the light hit the first bridge just right, casting long shadows across the Rio Grande, locals would sometimes tell the story of how it came to be. They would talk about the woman engineer who had come to their town when such a thing was nearly unheard of, about the cowboy who had helped her when no one else would, about the love story that had built something lasting and true. The story became legend, changing slightly with each retelling but maintaining its essential truth. That determination and courage and love could overcome any obstacle, could bridge any divide, could build something that endured long after the builders themselves were gone. And the bridges remained, standing strong through floods and droughts, through wars and peace, through the changing of centuries. They stood as testament to Louisa Hartwell Zimmerman and Carter James Zimmerman, 2 people who had met beside a river and decided to build something together, something that would serve their community for generations to come. They had built more than bridges. They had built a life, a family, a legacy of service and love. And though their bodies had returned to the Texas earth, they had both loved so well. Their spirits lived on in every person who crossed those bridges, in every young engineer who read Louisa's journals, in every descendant who carried forward the values they had embodied. The story of the woman who built a bridge across the river the whole town needed, and the cowboy who carried timber without a word, became more than history. It became inspiration, proof that love and determination could change the world, one timber beam at a time, one act of faith at a time, one bridge at a time. And on the banks of the Rio Grande, where Louisa had first stood with her drawings and her dreams, where Carter had first approached on his gray mare and offered to help, the river continued to flow as it had for millennia. But now it flowed beneath bridges, beneath structures that existed because 2 people had dared to envision something better and had worked together to make that vision real. That was the true legacy, not just the bridges themselves, but the example they set. The proof that one person's vision, supported by another's faith, could create something that served the greater good. That love did not require grand gestures, but could be found in the quiet, steady act of showing up day after day, carrying timber, solving problems, building something together. The sun set over Presidio, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, the same colors that had lit the evening when Carter first kissed Louisa on the completed bridge so many years ago. The bridges cast long shadows across the water, solid and permanent, and somewhere in the gathering darkness, the story of how they came to be was being told again, passed from one generation to the next, ensuring that Louisa and Carter's love would never be forgotten. They had built bridges that would stand for a century or more. But more importantly, they had built a love that would echo through eternity, inspiring everyone who heard their story to believe in the power of determination, the strength of partnership, and the enduring nature of love freely given and gratefully received. And that, in the end, was the greatest bridge of all, the bridge between what was and what could be, between loneliness and love, between one person's dream and a community's benefit. Louisa and Carter had crossed that bridge together, and in doing so had shown countless others the way. The bridges remained, and the love remained, and the story remained, told and retold under the Texas stars, a testament to what 2 people could accomplish when they believed in each other, and were brave enough to build something extraordinary together.